Hey everyone, welcome to this edition of In the Arena, Recall's live stream where we cover everything about AI. For this edition, we're going to be talking about how agents are shifting from controlled experiments to real world environments. As they become interfaces for crypto, devices, and data, what foundations around identity, data integrity, and execution will make this transition not only safe, but transformative and impactful? I'm excited to be joined for this edition with Larry, Matt, and David. I'll let them introduce themselves and then we'll jump right in. Larry, why don't you
All
kick us
right,
off?
sounds great. Hey guys, my name is Larry Pang, head of ecosystem here at IoTeX. I joined IoTeX in 2017, and since then we've been building out a lot of infrastructure that focuses on connecting the physical and digital worlds. We really had a big focus on digital identity for machines. We've done a lot to support a lot of the decentralized physical infrastructure network or DPIN projects, and now we're kind of have our eyes set on how do we take all the things we built over the past 5 to 6 years and really apply it for good to the AI sector. And a lot of that has to do with verified data sources that come from real time and real world sources and feeding them to AI in a trustworthy fashion so that the language models and the agents can take more informed actions in the real world. So excited to dive in more throughout the stream, but thank you guys.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for joining. Matt, why don't you kick us off next?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm Matt. I'm co-founder of Gaia. We build decentralized AI inference. So we enable folks to take open source large language models from the likes of Hugging Face. There's now like 2 million open source models out there in the open source. Take your own data and how you want to handle compute and basically launch your own inference. You can service AI agents, AI apps. The goal is that over time, we think there will be an internet of agents that own their own models at different sizes, different kind of use cases. But we want to be the enabler of people monetizing their own data in this new internet economy or agentic economy. And yeah, we're doing some really cool stuff. We launched our network last month. We have about 700,000 nodes on the network, and we are in Q4 going to be introducing our eigenlayer ABS for more kind of established trust of these different services.
Cool, lots of exciting stuff. David, take it away.
Hey guys, David Johnston. One of the code maintainers for Morpheus. Been contributing to the project since 2023 when the white paper came out in September. Class of 2012 in Bitcoin, helped with the early days of Ethereum in 2013, 2014. Probably most people know me for coining the term decentralized applications or dApps. I wrote a framework back in October of 13. It was like, hey guys, let's use all those great things about Bitcoin for other projects. And that idea kind of caught on. But more recently been really passionate about smart agents. Like, how do I have the individual hold the ownership and the actual key to their agent, right? So I'm a very much a not your keys, not your agent kind of guy. And with Morpheus, that's been a lot of the goal is how do we take all this amazing AI tech that's come out and connect it to Web3 and crypto and give people that ownership layer. So yeah, just happy to be here. Looking forward to nerding out with you guys.
Cool. You guys have some big missions and working on awesome projects, obviously, like redefining the space and what's possible at the intersection of crypto and AI. Let's jump right into some of the stuff. First, we can start with talking about identity and provenance at the edge. And so maybe we'll start with Larry. So just like question that I was thinking, like, how do we decide when a device or an agent has proven enough for others to trust its signal? So you talked a lot about like integrating all these data sources and being able to power more intelligent AI systems. How can they trust these sources? Like, how should we be thinking about this data supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now we're in the early innings of AI, right? I think a lot of the everyday users of these kind of ChatGPT style agents don't necessarily care too much about where the intelligence is coming from because they have trust in the institution that built it out, right? They have trust that OpenAI or Anthropic or Google has done their diligence and created models that will source data correctly, or at least try to verify it in some shape or form, right? As we get into the era where it's not just these behemoth organizations building out agents and building out AI-enabled tools, it's going to become more and more important that we have some type of paper trail or some type of provenance about where this data is actually coming from, right? So to explain this, like, how do we trust the sources of data given no trusted authority that has put their rubber stamp on it? More for like a bottoms up perspective. I think it's also it's important to draw an analogy to like how do we trust anything in society today, right? If you wanted to hire someone for your company, there's I think two really important questions that you need to answer. Are they who they say they are? And can they do what they say they can do, right? Um, are you who you say you are is kind of leveraging these trusted authorities, right? Like, give me your social security number, give me your credit history, give me your other kind of web of trust credentials so that I can trust that you are actually a real person, and you're what the things that you say on your resume, like you went to this school or you had this occupation before, those are all verified, right? But in this day and age, people follow along all these like, Lazarus style North Korea hacks. It's easy to fake the "Are you who you say you are" test, right? So if you're applying for a coding job or any other job for that matter, the next question is, can you do what you say you're supposed to be doing, right? So that's when like the in-person coding tests or the case studies or the live interviews come in to make sure, okay, I have all your credentials. I can verify that you're not a bot or you're not a fake person. Well, now make sure that you can actually do all the things that you state you could do, right? So that's just an analogy to how we build trust in the professional sector. Maybe you go through a similar process when you try to make friends or choose what kind of products to buy. But in this kind of AI age, doing this is super important, right? Does the device that you're sourcing data from have manufacturer's credentials, or have a UID that can be traced back to the company that manufactured it? So we know it's not just like a random um, knockoff device, right? And then another way that you can verify the device is issue it challenges that only that device would be able to perform, right? If you are trying to verify that the data from a weather station is valid, and it's supposed to be spitting out temperature readings with 5 decimal places of accuracy, then that should be a challenge that you issue to all the devices to prove that, hey, this is actually a real device, right? There's not like one magic way to do this. It's really like defense in layers or verification in layers. So the more credentials you require and the more challenges you submit to these data sources, the more trustworthy it can be. And I think right now, again, the trustworthy factor is not the it's not the make or break for how people choose these AI tools. It's really the performance and the convenience. But we're going to get to a day very soon when all of that is kind of reaching a similar level, and people are going to care about, okay, as it gets more specialized, you're going to start to care about these verification things a lot more.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, I'm just thinking about all the sort of applications of that now, and sort of just like where we're at in the development of the AI ecosystem. Like, people are first now just like, does it work? Is it good enough? But as these things sort of reach a plateau, then people start to care a lot more about, like, for a food reference, like, is it organic? Is it trusted? Can I, is it better for me? So I guess like I wanted to turn it over to Matt and David for a follow-up, but like, so now obviously if we've got all this data flowing into an agent or into a system, how do we think about sort of interoperability or composability of these proofs or trustworthiness of data as it's traveling within sort of the agent to agent ecosystem or the AI to AI ecosystem, when the sort of generators of data, they're sort of one layer abstracted and now it's moving around between intelligent systems?
Well, I mean, I think that's where on-chain comes in, right? You can't fake a blockchain timestamp, right? So if I can create an immutable identity and I can verify its past performance, now I have, reputation, right? And something that can't be faked. And I can look on chain, has this agent served a million other people and been around for 6 months, or did somebody pop it out yesterday, and the guy that created it is the only one who's tested it, right? That gives me a really clear signal. I think that's the place to start, is get this information on chain, and we're seeing good work being done there, right? ERC 8004 has come out, and now it's proposing registries for identity, validation, and reputation. I think that's a good step in the right direction as far as creating the primitives.
Yeah, and I think there's there's all kinds of different components that we want to garner that trust, and there's different levels perhaps of decentralization. I think in the future, and even now, like there's the ability to just run your own models locally, and that's perhaps not in some people's mind like decentralization, but it's definitely like full privacy. It's sovereign. It's you own it. You basically set the rules for it. But as you start kind of getting these systems to play with each other in either public or permission environments, like you need to have that kind of validation or verification of or proof of different levels. Like I would say, like on the agent side, it's is the agent able to do the work because of certain permissions or certain identity components. I know like the Billions team with Pravado, they're working on like KYA, like know your agent type work. There's even some like standards that are being put into practice, and then of course there's 8004 that's doing a lot of work in that space as well for Ethereum standards. But on the infrastructure side, it's what we're focused on is maybe it's not that application agent that you're interacting with, but as that agent is running things against kind of its model and RAG, how do you know that what inference or like kind of response it's providing you is either it's basically the model or the inference that it say that it's providing you, if you're paying for that service, or agents are paying for that service, or agents are charging other agents to access that service. There needs to be verification of that inference, of that kind of combination of data, compute, and model. And then it goes all the way down the stack. There's like was the compute properly utilized to some extent for some requests, and how is that kind of commissioned or compensated? And so that's kind of the beauty of using this using blockchain and a smart contract platform, is that where's the one place we can create irrefutable trust with decentralized network of operators, and where can we to David's point, like find timestamps and actual proof that these things were completed. And also, how do we coordinate resources on a massive scale and micropayments? Like blockchain is your home. Like we're ready for it. But there's like so many moving pieces with like that question. We're very focused on more of the infrastructure, the inference side. But we want to be able to support agents that want permission to go do permissionless tasks on the internet.
Yeah, and that's why I was excited to have you all on, because it feels like you're all playing at different complementary layers of this architecture for improved AI trust, verifiability. And so I guess, Matt, since I already like have you, maybe let's talk a little bit about how, when agents and AI are sort of built more openly, with sort of open data sets, custom RAG and knowledge bases and fine tuning, like what's possible that wasn't possible when building these things on closed systems or closed APIs?
In what time frame? Like recent days?
Yeah, I mean, like maybe let's talk a little bit about recent days, and maybe just about where the vision really starts to diverge and sort of the future.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. So, and again, it's a bit biased, from our perspective. So feel free to counter me, anybody. But the way we see things, as I mentioned, there's 2 million, available open source, smaller large language models in open source. A lot of these models, have different use cases. Most folks in the audience are probably familiar with, Llama 3B or Mistral, Qwen, DeepSeek, Kimi K2, like a lot of these more popular models you hear about in open source. And so we enable you to take your own data, use open source kind of RAG development or vectorization tools. And you can run your own, kind of inference service on your computer. Now, the interesting thing you can do that you can't do with perhaps like a larger centralized provider is, you're not necessarily, I use the word censored in the sense of like platforms. Like, I don't know if people heard or saw the news with like Eliza being completely deplatformed off X and now is like going full blown on Farcaster. Things like that. That is censorship. Like that is, there's someone senses some competition and wants to prevent, someone from accessing or accessing the moat. And so, imagine if you have, a nation of 1 million agents that are now no longer able to talk to these customers. Like that's scary. Or like, if you're a business and you're putting all your data into a model that is routing through someone else's, API kind of server infrastructure and not your own, local on-prem situation or your own cloud, who's to say they can't just absolutely rug you and be like, hey, that data is not actually yours, it's ours. You either pay a premium for it or kick rocks. And that's scary when you start looking at it from like an individual level to a small business to a country. Like OpenAI has this like OpenAI countries now, and I'm just like, that does not sound like a good idea in my opinion. But I'm sure they're doing the right things. I don't want to wear too much of a tinfoil hat, but I think for the things you can do now, it's like you can run local models with your own data. You can create your own privacy, how you want to kind of serve that to your agents. It's going to run a lot more performance if you take a smaller large language model with very specific context. It's actually a lot more energy efficient and performant if it's asked to do like a very kind of specific task. Of course, like if you're doing these larger generalized models, like you're gonna need these like massive parameter kind of models to handle that kind of workload. But if you're trying to do a very specific task, I would invite people to try and run their own models on their own devices and just see what kind of open source systems look like when you own your own kind of setup.
Yeah, lots of good points. I know that David said that he wanted to weigh in, but I think he just dropped.
The agents took him.
Now
he's back. He's back.
So,
David,
yeah, I want to agree with Matt, and I would sum it up as Web3 AI is AI you can own. Everything else is intelligence you can rent, right? You can rent it from Google, you can rent it from somebody else. And the moment that credit card expires, like it all goes away. Like you don't own those models, those prompts, those outputs, or any of the rest of it. And I'll go more direct and frank and say, no, they don't have your best interest at heart, right? Their entire incentive model is to sell your data. Like Google's entire incentive model is to auction off your thoughts and searches and queries to the highest bidder, right? And so this is just going to be Web 2 on steroids, where like everything you ask about, they're not incentivized to give you the best answer, right? It has to be good enough, but they're incentivized to give you the answer that somebody pays them to give you, right? I've started to see that now in the results. Like I go on some of these things and it's like, it'll say like this part of the prompt response was advertised. And I was like, I don't need random advertisements in my outputs. And to be even more blunt, a lot of the world will not be able to use these corporate solutions. If you are sitting in China today, you cannot use ChatGPT. They straight up blocked ChatGPT, just like they blocked Google and Facebook and all the other Western apps. And so it's not surprising that open source is what's winning in China, because it's what the CCP can't stop, right? It's the unstoppable, knowledge engine that everybody can access, right? And so it's the same playbook we saw in crypto. Most of the adoption is in the developing world where people don't have another option. And this gets them from 0 to 1, right? You look at crypto adoption, where is it at? India, China, Indonesia, Brazil, Nigeria, right? There's not a European country in the top 10, right? We've got lots of nice solutions for in the Western world for sending and receiving money. But the guy in Nigeria has a smartphone, but zero access to global finance. For him, it's a game changer, right? So anyway, that's what gets me excited is I think what we're building here with decentralized AI will be the mass market solution because it's what people are going to be able to access regardless of jurisdiction.
Yeah, it's a crazy thought. Like if you think about Google in the Web 2 context, it's like it told you where to look. And now with sort of advertisements in prompt responses and language models, it's like now influencing what you're supposed to think. It's like next level potential for censorship, manipulation,
Sure.
opinion seeding, and all these things, behavior modification.
Yeah.
And totally agree. Like it with the comment about open source and sort of access to, sort of when there is no viable alternative, like people will take the little bit of extra effort and potentially do things that are a little more difficult because they have a higher incentive to do that. I think we saw it in crypto and already seeing it in AI. So, I mean, like, I guess another thing that is kind of like a bit adjacent to this, but somewhat related is kind of this open question thought I've been having is like in this world where there's a lot of open source models, people kind of like DIYing their intelligence to a certain extent, owning their intelligence. And, but then sort of, I guess, on the other side with these, larger institutions and corporate intelligence models, like, people have come to expect a certain level of reliability from them. Like they'll do what they advertise to do, generally speaking. Like, yeah, sure, maybe it underperforms or overperforms at given skills, but they're not like super far off on what they're saying it can do and what people actually experience it to do. So like, can this like openness and reliability coexist in the crypto world where people own their AI and there's a lot more proliferation of a variety of niche solutions? Like, how do we reach the sort of performance reliability that we get from some of these corporate solutions, but in the more decentralized context?
Yeah, I'm happy to start that one at least. We're talking to a lot of enterprises that are moving to open source models, or at least exploring, because one, and for context too, like I'm previous like JP Morgan blockchain open source quorum team, so I have a lot of experience like kind of on the inside of these kinds of problems. It's very hard for an organization to go and use something like an OpenAI, where you're just giving all of your data to an external party, especially a massive bank, or perhaps like anyone managing healthcare data or very sensitive financial information. And so, from their perspective, they're looking at privacy as their biggest kind of driver. And so, yeah, to David's point earlier, like, do they have our best interests in mind? I don't know. If you're a company, you take that risk. It seems nice to have like a straightforward SaaS bill for your OpenAI, but there's two major problems. One is privacy. You're having to trust this institution is handling it the right way. I'm sure they do a lot of perhaps like SOC 2 compliance for whatever their setup is, or they work with the enterprise to figure out what works for their systems. But a lot of these enterprises or commercials are looking at how do they just do this themselves? How do they get their engineering teams to just rig up a few open source models that solve like an internal use case? Anything outside of like employees using it as a help a little co-pilot for their work. But if you're using like AI to like automate workflows or manage big tranches of data, they're looking at these open source models with unique kind of specialties of these models. And the last piece I'll say on that is like, as the enterprise, again, if you become your own inference provider, OpenAI and Anthropic and these guys, they are able to kind of subsidize a lot of the bill that they're giving us right now, because similar to Web 2, they want us to onboard and provide data so they can figure out how to monetize it later. But the reality is like you're getting charged, let's say, as a business, like $200 to $2,000 a month in a OpenAI bill. Whereas like on the back end, that's probably costing them like 3x, 5x, in terms of operations of running compute and maintaining data, kind of synthesization, etc. So if you're a business, you have to inherit that cost. And so it's kind of like, oh shit, do I have the right infrastructure or compute to manage that in house? And the answer is most likely, because these models, like if you're using it for a very specific use case, it's not requiring this massive generalized compute. Whereas like, we ask OpenAI, like, what's a cool place to grab pizza? And it's like, costing them $100 to like run that call. Whereas like in a business, it's probably a little more like context specific and specialized. But that's just my 2 cents. I'd love to hear the other guys' opinions.
Sure. Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, I think like for me, it depends on like who the user is and like what the use case is, right? The question about like openness versus reliability versus performance. I think if you are a enterprise or a big company or even a nation state that really values data privacy, you probably have the resources to spin up DeepSeek or Llama 4 on a local run, and then build out your agent stack. For like an everyday person, I think there's a time when DeepSeek came out and everyone was like, "Oh, great! I can just run this locally." Yeah, if you're a coder, you're a programmer, it's easy to just grab a GPU and run DeepSeek locally and maybe tailor it to your needs to protect the data privacy side. But I would say the majority of the population doesn't have the technical chops or maybe even desire to do that, right? So I think at the enterprise level, um, the reliability is super important. As we've seen, like in the cloud industry, everyone expects 5 nines of uptime and really, picks these vendors, maybe not because of the innovation that they provide, but like the customer support, the integration support, the time to market. But yeah, I think it really depends on who we're talking about. But agree with what Matt says.
So my take on this is, effectively the end user, wants things to be free, right? And given the extreme cost efficiency increases we've seen in AI tokens, they're literally 100x cheaper than they were last year, right? And that's why we're getting reasoning models and all these things, because people can now throw a lot more tokens at a prompt than they could 2-3 years ago, right? And I think we're going to continue going down that trend as the Blackwell chips and everything else comes out, and we have 4 times as much inference per GPU. So, with the open source models catching up on the quality side and the cost of the tokens falling so much, we're going to get to the point very soon where you can serve a user a great experience almost for free, right? And what's really interesting about that is, that's the model that ultimately conquered the internet, right? Is there are a lot of pay to play models out there, but what won was free, right? And it wasn't really free because they were mining your data, and most people didn't understand that. But I think if we can root it in decentralized AI and the person holding the key and having the choice, we're a lot closer to a world in which those free services have to share a lot of the value with users in order to attract them versus to use the alternative, right? And that's probably where it ends up, right? Because some people, like, I don't care if it knows that I, am hungry for, Subway today. Like, I'll share my, food preferences. I don't care. And most people probably wouldn't care, but they might like getting $50 a year for that data versus $100 of that going to some intermediary that's taking all that data and selling it to other people, right? So I think we're getting a lot closer to, if the default is users own that information, they can set those preferences, right? And become that data broker, which was completely impractical in the days of Web 2 because there was no micropayment layer. There was no 402 like Coinbase is trying to pioneer with, doing native web payments that use stable coins. And we didn't have layer 2s that could do transactions for a penny and confirm in 200 milliseconds. But like, we're there now, right? And so I'm pretty encouraged that we'll both be able to serve like that retail mass user. But for all the reasons that you mentioned, the enterprise guys are going to want it for the same reason, which is why Linux ended up winning, right? Because people in an enterprise context didn't want to, one, ship their data to somebody else, and two, pay for a license fee every time they spun up a new server, right? And so people have gotten in their mind like, oh, these companies have all the GPUs and all the intelligence and all the money. Nonsense. The open source community is by far larger than any one company on intelligence and capital and access to compute. And the data point I always use is Ethereum back when it was GPU mined. People were throwing at it 50 times as many GPUs as trained ChatGPT 4. If you give an incentive, people will show up with lots of compute, right? And so I think a lot of these, can be solved and will be solved by the technology we're building.
Cool. By the way, insane stat.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just gonna make one comment on all that. Like, that is absolutely correct. And I think the interesting thing to think about for folks is, Web 2 has their way of doing different business models. And the way we're working with Web 3 and this kind of new internet of ownership and trust. I think our specialty in kind of decentralized AI will be how do we coordinate where different providers can come in and offer the services and get paid for those services. It's not just agents, handling some tasks. This is like a lot of the back end. Who wants to provide compute? To David's point, or who wants to handle the training or fine tuning of some of these models for certain use cases? Who wants to handle kind of data availability and perhaps even like different integrations like X402 for enabling new extensible applications of this infrastructure. So the cool thing is that we're a much more collaborative ecosystem, and there's cool ways where people can provide services to this infrastructure, to this network, not just ours. Like, this is like, it's the coolest thing about the decentralized AI community is that like we all want to collaborate and make sure that agents can use all of our infrastructure equally. Because agents are not going to give a crap about being loyal to one ecosystem. They're going to be moving across different platforms. They just want the path of least resistance. They want incentives, and they will be the largest consumers of the internet. So we need to figure out what is the value that we can bring in Web3 that beats out Web2's business model of capture all the data, monetize that data. On our side, it's like coordinate resources, perhaps take fees off of that, and then we're really selling like decentralized trust and giving people ownership of kind of this whole AI kind of ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. Obviously, like in crypto and decentralized ecosystems, everyone's trying to build a utility. We got to pull all these things together, compose them into a solution where everyone can do what they do best as layers of this ultimate like decentralized AI stack. And obviously with crypto rails and incentives, like it makes all of this feasible. But I guess how should we be thinking about, while we're on the topic of incentives, like how should we be thinking about these incentive structures of the decentralized AI stack and sort of aligning them to make sure they're complementary? Like, do you see some incentives that need to be developed in order to make this possible? Like, where are we in terms of stack maturity, and how does that relate to some of the incentive models that are needed to make this thing a reality?
So my view is you really have to incentivize the infrastructure that is common to all the projects. That's what really attracted me when I read the Morpheus white paper, is I hadn't seen something since, I don't know, Ethereum, where somebody sort of thought through the incentives, not just for capital and not just for compute, but also for developers. And that's usually the one that's missed, right? Everybody's got a proof of work or a proof of stake, but normally people don't, go all in on incentivizing people to build on the platform or to maintain the core infrastructure, right? That's, I was there for the white paper to the launch of Ethereum, and the thing people missed was it wasn't the token sale. It wasn't the GPUs that showed up to mine it. It was the hundreds of developers that Vitalik airdropped ETH to in the Genesis block. He hunted down every guy that had so much commented in GitHub and radically rewarded them and formed that early developer community. People ask me, like, why are all the developers on ETH? Because that's where they got rewarded, right? And that's, to me, the holy trinity. Like, you have to reward capital and compute, but also developers, right? And so I think those are the keys. And how do you build that into automated smart contracts so that doesn't get sucked into a foundation with a couple of guys that, basically give themselves grants, and it's a big bureaucracy and committees and approvals and stuff like that. And unfortunately, DAOs often sort of revert to that. And so what's been encouraging is the last couple of years, we have all the tools now to do these fair launch type models like Morpheus pioneered, where people can still hold the custody of their token. They can stake it towards a project they want to support, right? And to me, it's mind-blowing that $3 billion has now gone through those smart contracts that the Morpheus community first built. And now that model has been extended to anybody who wants to stake towards an agent and stake for inference. Now I can hand an agent some tokens, you can stake them, and it'll have inference forever, right? Because it's accessing part of the inference that's available to the network. So, but what I like about that is this is like neutral infrastructure. There's no company, there's no entity, there's no pre-mine. Anybody can offer the inference, anybody can offer the agents. And I think that's how you build the broadest network effects. And I think it's been really exciting. We've seen Venice come out of that. We've seen Think come out of that. So a lot of these projects are sort of tapping into different pieces of those incentives. And the last piece I'll say is I'm a fan of long-term projects. If you've ever seen the supply curve for Morpheus, it goes on basically for like 1,000 years because of their recycling mechanism, but it's still capped at 42 million tokens. So, there are people that, come out and they dump all the tokens onto the market, and 30 days later, like, it has a giant spike and then people go away. That's not a long-term plan to build real infrastructure. So anyway, that's sort of where my head's at.
Yeah, on the data side is something I think about a lot, especially from like untapped data type of perspective. Like everything that's on the internet is basically available to these large language models already. So, this holy grail that a lot of these physical AI companies are talking about, which are people that are building out humanoids or drones or, autonomous vehicles. A lot of that data does not exist in mass today, right? Like Figure, for example, which is a popular like traditional robotics company, just dropped a video where they have their Figure 2 robot washing dishes, right? How did that robot learn to wash dishes and put them in a dishwasher? It's not by scraping the internet. For sure, they had thousands of people wearing motion capture suits just to get the finger dexterity right to hold a dish and scrub it with a sponge and put it into a dishwasher without having seen the dishwasher before, right? So another example of this is, Tesla had a job opening on their jobs page, $50 an hour for anyone that would wear their kind of Optimus suit, which is another version of this motion capture suit, just to get this data that doesn't really exist. Like people aren't strapping motion capture sensors on their body on a day-to-day basis. They need to be incentivized to do it, right? So it's really a race to build this new source of untapped data to train these physical embodiments of AI. But the other thing with the incentives is like you don't want everyone to be able to do this. If you've never washed a dish in your whole life, then you strap on these motion capture gloves and you start to wash dishes, then you're not really training the robot to do anything useful, right? Or if you're trying to train a robot to kick the perfect penalty kick, would you rather strap up Leo Messi with a motion capture suit or go to below 10 soccer game and have all the kids try their best to kick, right? So how do you incentivize the most high signal and high value data, of which you can break that into a bunch of simulations and artificial data sets? Or this is open incentivization where anyone that can speak English can talk into a microphone and we can train voice models off of that. So different models for different purposes will need different incentives for the data. But I think it's a huge opportunity for crypto because this is not only applicable to people in the US or China or Europe or wherever. It's really like a global thing, especially when we start to deploy these physical embodiments in certain environments, right?
Yeah, 100%. So if we think about the other side of that question, like talked a little bit about incentives, but to make the decentralized AI landscape here now, obviously it's working to some extent. Different pieces are working. There's certain pockets that have accelerated. But what are we missing to really like realize the vision of it? Like, what are the missing pieces of infrastructure, of coordination, fabric, um, incentives aside, that we need to create systems that are better than what centralized could offer, and or are we already there?
Yeah, the biggest thing on our side is kind of establishing this trustware. You know, when your agent or AI app is using like OpenAI API or you know, Grok or Claude, you're borrowing the trust from that institution. They're hosting, you know, all the kind of the management of the compute, the data, and the models for inference. And when they're serving that to you, they're also kind of managing kind of how the, you know, the prompt management works, how they're handling RAG and all these moving pieces. So they're doing that for you in a very kind of closed box structure, but they're giving you the trust of like, hey, we're handling this. You know, you go borrow this API key from OpenAI, and you know you can use it to the level that we allow you to. And you're renting it. To David's point, now you know that is trust. Like that is some form of kind of centralized trust. Now, if we have an internet where anyone and everyone is able to provide that service to an open internet of agents or to, you know, apps and human end users, how do you know that that service is doing what it's supposed to be doing? How do you know that it's not going to rug you in some way, shape, or form? You know, in Gaia, for example, like if you have you know, billions of nodes, trillions of nodes in the future, and you know, they are serving like DeFi use cases, and there's like similar like YouTube, you see like a bunch of these different channels or nodes that are saying they are Uniswap or they are like Aave, and like trust us, you know, we're using this data a certain way, and we're providing you solid inference. You need a way to ensure that the provider is who they say they are, or at least they're going to provide the service that is trusted. And so we're using staking and kind of like an inference AVS in the Eigenlayer ecosystem. We have our own native staking as well, but you know, we're using an approach for doing like validation of that inference, where it's staking and slashing if those responses are not actually doing what they say they're doing. I think there's a lot of other approaches in the space. Folks are doing like zkML, people are doing optimistic ML. We're taking more of a like calculated approach. We have like a white paper on it called Trust but Verify. It's a peer-reviewed paper. You can go check it out. We also have our white paper out. But we see kind of this need for securing trust with an economic engine of Ethereum. But there are people doing it more with like cryptographic proofs using a blockchain. But you know, that's on the inference side.
Yeah. The big thing I would highlight is discovery, right? And we're just getting to the point where you can even do it, right? There are lists floating around on GitHub and on X of MCP servers and agents and stuff like that. But before 8004, there's no registry. Like, how do I know which ones are up and which ones are running? And you also need the off-chain stuff, as in like who's running the inference that fuels the agent that's registered over here. Half the time when I look at the MCP list, nobody's running those servers, right? They're expecting you to import some code and run it yourself, which most people will not do, right? And so we need to get to that app store type moment, right? And what did Apple do? They handled all the hardware for developers, right? They gave them discovery, they gave them distribution. Just write the code, publish it to the App Store, and your app can be discovered. And we'll handle payments, we'll handle the infrastructure, everything in the back end. And developers were willing to pay 30% of all of their revenue to Apple for those services, right? And there's more competition now. X gives 90% to creators, and it's 10% to the platform. And I think that's kind of where it's headed. But regardless, that's a great proof that if you can create all those primitives, wrap them together for developers, and they can just build agents and they can just create the next cool thing and not have to worry about that back end stuff, that's going to get really compelling. But you get into, so I wrote a paper on smart agents back in May of 23, and a separate paper on this idea of smart rank. How do we rank and index all of those agents? And what are the metrics that you can actually look at that people can't just game? Right. And you end up with a lot of on-chain metrics, like how much value has flowed through, how long has it been used, did it, fit this use case? But we're just getting to that point where you can even build that ranking algorithm because you needed the identity and the reputation and the on-chain information first. So for me, I think that's a big focus this next year is how do we solve discovery, and how do we provide all that to developers that want to just build cool agents.
Yeah, I touched upon a little bit of this, but I think the missing infrastructure piece is one of the missing infrastructure pieces at the data layer, right? How do we source new untapped data sources? It doesn't just include like real world, real time, like sensor data. It also includes all like the paywalled stuff that isn't publicly scrapable today. And a lot of that stuff is behind, user passwords, corporate passwords, and all that can be maybe further incentivized to be provided to people that want to train AI. So the provenance of data, feeding more data to these AIs, just so the training process can be kind of iterated upon, I think will unlock the next use cases for the AI sector.
I love it. Vampire attacking paywalls.
Honestly, yeah. There's the customer we were talking about that does this for Zillow, and it's not that Zillow has a lot of like data behind paywalls, but they have a API ping limit, right? So a lot of people give up their Zillow accounts so that they can just maximize the amount of like refreshes of this data. So it's somewhat paywalled, just rate limited. People can provide their own like pro accounts so that maybe it's more like an arbitrage opportunity than like a AI training opportunity.
Well, and just to build on what you're saying, Larry, I couldn't agree more. Like it feels like we've saturated the global public information, like 10 trillion tokens, right? Basically the big models went and read everything on the internet ever, right? And that'll continue to grow. But people forget private data dwarfs public data. Like, think about this in your own life. I have 100,000 photos over 18 years in, Google or Apple or wherever my storage of my photos is in the cloud. Like, how many have I made public? I don't know, a few hundred posts on X or Facebook or something like that. For me, it's a literal 100x of what I have privately versus what I put publicly, right? And so I feel like we're just at the beginning. Like we haven't even touched the potential for the personalization of agents. Once I've got a personal agent that I own, that I'm willing to let touch all of my most important data because I know I own it at the end of the day. It's aligned to my outcomes. It's trying to make me money. It's trying to do jobs for me, right? That's the framework we have to get to for the same reason that we ended up with personal smartphones. Like we didn't start with personal phones. You had a link into the terminal and it went to a mainframe, right? But over time, everybody wanted to take their photos and contacts and memories and apps with them wherever they went, and they wouldn't want to be beholden to their employer or government or something like that, right? So I think framework-wise, we're going to end up with something very similar where you own your AI because that's what makes sense from like taking it portability wise across everything I do in life.
So let's I got one more question for you all. Maybe we'll just go around a little bit, a bit future looking, but we'll use it as a good one to wrap up on. So I mean, if if agents and decentralized AI sort of proliferates and becomes the default way that people are using, accessing intelligence, if these things are operating across all of our platforms and interfaces and all the sort of workflows that we do in our daily life and in our business, what is the biggest shift, whether that's technical, social, or economic, that we and all the listeners have to prepare for?
So many things. I think the biggest one that we always get asked on like these kinds of talks are, will I be replaced? Will I not have a job? I think that was for me. Like I feel like if you're somebody who's entrepreneurial or perhaps can manage this attention economy, like you're a great marketer, you're a great manager of people, you have taste, you have kind of perhaps technical chops to build something that can make money. I don't think you should be too concerned. I think the big shock was that for all the sci-fi films we've seen in our lives, like blue collar work was, probably thought to be the first thing that goes with AI. Now it's looking like white collar, like coding jobs are even at risk. Uh, but I don't think people should be too concerned. I think it makes us much more be concerned, but it makes us much more performant as a human species. I think we're like doing 100,000x more things we can do now than we were able to do like a year ago or 2 years ago. But like I would warn people to figure out what that mode is that you can kind of become an owner of and get really good at managing agents because we're going to be working with a lot more of them. And just be very careful of like how you're managing your data in these systems because that is the one thing that does concern me. Like from this talk, seems like it's a concern of all of us. Is at some point, if all of our data and likeness is at the bay of a small group of people or entities, what is that? What is the moat that's left for us to control? Because that is then when it's like, well, we all just have to go work for OpenAI at some point. So yeah, I don't know. Those are my kind of the big hanging things I hear a lot from the community is like, will I have a job?
Yeah, I think about like AI in kind of two categories. Like one is in theory, and the other one's kind of like in practice, right? Like in theory to me is you writing up a prompt asking AI to tell you something that you didn't know or you just didn't want to research yourself, right? And we're definitely at peak of this, maybe not peak, but like, it's reached the tipping point where, you know, if you wanted to ask AI, where to put bike lanes in a certain city based on every public piece of knowledge, so you can, as like an urban planner, it could do that job extremely well, right? In practice, if you want to say, hey, how do I bike from point A to point B the fastest? That's not really grabbing upon all of the historical data from the internet, but a lot of the real-time sensor data kind of overlaid or intersected with all of that historical data. So it's kind of I think the in theory use cases are going to save a lot of time for humans, maybe create some take away some jobs, create some new jobs, but overall net positive, I think, for society to have not just Google searches at your fingertips, but like straight to the answer responses to any prompt for free, potentially very soon. But the in practice stuff is kind of scary. If you start to give your uh, give permission for AI to navigate your personal life or like change your daily patterns, that's where it can get a little socially and societally wonky. A lot of economic opportunities in there to be the one that be the engine behind all of that stuff. But uh, yeah, I'm not sure if the in practice use cases need to be definitely very safe. All these things that we're talking about from the infrastructure and the data perspective are going to lend itself to that. But who knows? Once the cat's out of the bag for that, I guess we'll just see.
So let me bring us home on a very optimistic note. I'm an economics nerd, and if you guys have heard of Javin's paradox, people often think that when the price of something goes down, the industry will shrink. But what we see is the opposite. As the cost of transistors went down, people spent more money on computers because now it could do video and not just text, right? And so we tend to put the new capacity to work. So go back to that developer who was worried about losing his job. Dude, if you were building a website or an app and it used to take you 3 months and now it takes you 3 days, that means you can build 100 of them in a year instead of 10, right? And if an engineer can now produce 10 or 100 times more valuable, how many engineers do you want? You want as many engineers as you can get if they're tooled up on how to use agents and these new tools, because they're so much more valuable. If they could create $100,000 of value a year, now they can create $1 million of value per year. Like, I want more engineers, but I want more engineers like that. I want the ones that know how to use the tools and multiply. And it also lowers the barrier. Like, we're all engineers now. If you can use and describe and articulate what you want to accomplish, like, you can actually do it. I coached my 15-year-old nephew through how to build a website, and with Claude and one of its wrappers called GenSpark, in 2 hours, we built the website, integrated the database, hooked up the DNS, and connected a Morpheus API key so it had AI built into it, and shipped it live. Like, I remember the 90s, it didn't used to be that easy, but we've lowered the bar so much. You're going to have 1 billion developers. And that's amazing. That's going to unleash this huge wave of creativity. So is life going to change? Yes, but maybe not in the way people expect, right? You know, computers let us all write and create slides and spreadsheets and all these things that used to be very niche professions. Right now, we're available to everybody. And I would argue that has vastly improved, living standards in society and productivity and all the rest. So yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about where we're heading. And I would just say lean in and learn the tools, right? That's the key. And it's the same with crypto, right? If you're worried about, the dollar and all these things becoming obsolete, like all these are failed currencies from different countries. These are all from the last 30 years, right? Most government currency devalues to the value of the paper it's printed on. Like, so if you're worried about that, own Bitcoin, own Ethereum, buy more tokens. Like, these are your ways to buy into the robotic economy, and whatever wins on these platforms and the value ends up flowing back there. So anyway, that's my optimistic note, but I think we're actually headed in a pretty good direction.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense, right? I think about it similarly in terms of journalism and reporters, right? And then with the advent of the internet and social media and the barrier to entry and distribution getting sort of democratized, it's like, do we consume less news? It's like, no, now there's that much more information in the world for, largely our benefit. But anyway, thanks for hanging out with me for the last hour. I think we covered a lot, and hopefully our watchers got a bunch of interesting insights and information out of this. Appreciate you all, and hopefully you'll join us again on a future episode.